Okay, let's get into some HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's a scripting language that uses things called tags, things like this guy here, to produce HTML elements. There are two different ways to open and close these elements. We have opening tags like this with corresponding closing tags like this, and we have self-closing tags like this. Tag name followed by a bunch of stuff, / and a closing chevron. These HTML elements can also have things like attributes. So you see down here with our image tag or element, we have a source attribute. This attribute points to a URL, which points to a picture. When we write HTML, we write it in a file called index.html. And the basic structure of one of these documents is the opening doc type. What type of document are we creating? HTML. Opening HTML tag, we put all the HTML and a head and a body. Now in the head, we put the code that we need loaded in before the page gets displayed. So things like title or style or metadata like authors and dates. You load scripts, you can load libraries, anything you need loaded in before the page gets quote unquote loaded, we put it in the head. The body is where you put the HTML that gets generated to the page. And so with that said, this page generates, or this code generates this page right here. And so HTML is a line-by-line executed language. So from top to bottom. First line is, of course, our doc type. Second is our HTML opening tag. And we have a head and we have a body. For this page, what gets preloaded is the title. So it tells our browser what to name the tab, our first web page. And then we have a style element, which allows us or gives us a control over what certain elements look like, their size, their color, their layout. Right now we are styling our header 1 tag, this hello world, with the color white, and we are resizing our image with a 100 by 100 pixels. If we didn't resize our image, we'd get the default size of the image we're importing or linking to, which is this guy here, which is way too large, which is why I resized it. Now the body tag, where we put the HTML that actually gets generated to the screen. What do we have? We're starting off with some header tags, H1 and H5. Header tags are just ways of pre-styling elements, basically sizing. So H1 is the largest header, and it goes all the way to H6. We have an H1 and an H5 here. Hello world, and glad to have you. Now, as you can see, as an attribute, there's a style attribute associated with many of these elements. So you can either inject your style up here like this, or you can influence your style down here like this. So down here, as a value of an attribute style, we got the background color of the hello world to black. Now on to the two paragraph tags, another way of pre-styling text. So this gray color is not unique to paragraphs. I styled it up here with our in the head. What is unique to a paragraph element is the spacing. So you can't see it, but there are margins in between the paragraph elements and all the other elements on screen. We have our image element, which we talked about earlier, which is the source, which has a source, which points to a URL, which points to this picture right here. We have our title attribute, which is what gets displayed when we hover our mouse over the picture. This is a JavaScript logo. Then we have the alt text attribute, which is what gets read out by screen readers for people with disabilities, jslogo.png. Finally, we have a form element. And as you can see, we can nest HTML elements within other HTML elements. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so our form element has within it 4 other types of HTML elements: label, input, line breaks, and buttons. These inputs, these are only 2 types. There are, I think, a dozen types. I'm showing you the text and the password. So these guys here, this would be the text guy, and the guy right underneath would be the password, which is masked text with these dots. The label element is a pointer to your input element. And so the for attribute, the value of that, matches the ID attribute of your input. And all we use this for is a way of convenience for the user. So instead of clicking on the field like this, they can click on the name and get redirected to the field. And finally, we got the button, which allows us to submit the form, which is extremely, extremely important in full stack development. And so why am I showing you all of this? I'm not showing you all this to give you a comprehensive look or teaching into HTML. I'm just showing you a bare bones page, what we need to get started with full stack development. We haven't even gotten to things like lists, ordered lists, unordered lists, links, how to lay out a page, flex boxes, displays, and all this very, very, very important to HTML, but not important to learning full stack development as a concept. So let's move on to some CSS. What is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And it's a way of styling other elements on the screen, or HTML elements on the screen. Size, shape, position, all of that with CSS. So how do we inject CSS into our HTML? Well, we've already done it here with the style tag and this style attribute. Now, to be clear, the style tag is HTML. That's all HTML. That's HTML. This syntax here, though, that's what CSS looks like. So we have the tag name, we got the curly braces, and then we got these key value pairs. This is what CSS looks like. There are two ways, well, there are three ways. We're looking at two ways. The third way we'll get into later, in a later video. But there are two ways here to inject CSS into your HTML. You can do it inline as an element right here, or you can do it as a value of an attribute within the tag like this here. Now, there are two ways to capture or to style elements in your HTML. You can do multiple elements at a time, or you can do one at a time. We saw an example where we did multiple elements at a time. And so every paragraph of our HTML on our page got this gray background color. But how do we go about choosing one of these paragraphs out of both paragraphs? How do we change maybe this one to like a black or a red background color and keep this one gray? Well, in order to do that, we need to look at references. So I'm going to type in some code and I'll be right back. Alright, so all I did was add two elements to the screen, same type of elements, span elements. All a span element is a generic way to capture text on screen. There's no predefined anything for a span. So we have a span that wraps a username text and a span that wraps a user PIN number text. Now pay attention to the class in the ID. This is how we create references in HTML. A class is like a type of car, so like a BMW or a Toyota or a Subaru. An ID is like the license plate. And so you can have many elements with the same class, but each element can only have one unique ID, one unique license plate. This is how we create references in HTML. How do we capture those references in CSS? Well, in order to capture a class, we use a period followed by the class name. To capture an ID, we use the hashtag followed by the ID name. So these two spans have the same class. So if I change the font size, both spans get affected. But these unique IDs, which are unique to each span, as you can see, our username gets colored blue and our user PIN number gets colored red. Now there's an important thing about cascading style sheets. There's a hierarchy at play. And so IDs outrank or overwrite classes, and classes overwrite generic tags. And so if I wrote, let's say, colored green here, our span tags would hold their color. So because they have IDs and their colors, the ID definition overwrites the class definition. So all of this is just a very, very basic intro or understanding of HTML and CSS. There's a lot more that can be said. We haven't even touched layouts, which can be a headache. But for our intents for this course, for full stack, we don't need to touch that just yet. So what did we go over? Well, we saw in HTML that there's a basic structure. There's a doc type, an HTML tag, a head, and a body. In the head is what we put the code that we want preloaded. In the body is where we put the code that we want displayed onto the screen. We saw that HTML attributes can be self-closing, or elements can be self-closing, or they can have an opening and closing tag. They can also have attributes like our image's source attribute or title attribute. I also showed you two different ways of injecting CSS into your code. We could do it inline as a style element, or we can do it as the value of an attribute within the tag itself. And I specifically included a form in this video. Why did I include a form in this video? Well, as we'll see in web development, we can boil all of web development, web apps, web pages, it doesn't matter. We can boil all of that down to a particular type of paradigm or logic flow, that we capture some sort of user input, In this case, it's pretty obvious, a username or a password. It could be things like mouse events, a click, where did they click, mouse dragging, maybe they put their mouse over a certain element on your screen. It doesn't matter. We capture some sort of user input. Based on that input, we send some sort of message to the back end. The back end sees our message and then responds. And so the form is the most basic and obvious example of this paradigm. So in the next video, we're going to actually start using JavaScript. I'm going to show you a couple of ways of injecting JavaScript into our page, and we're going to learn about something called the DOM. So like always, if you see value in this, like, comment, share, subscribe, thumbs up, whichever platform you're watching this on, and I will see you guys in the next one.